Hey, welcome back to Grit Gym. We've got Eric Schwager here. We're going to talk about the joint by joint approach to training. It's one of the concepts that we use out here at Grit Gym to make sure that we're keeping everybody safe from injury. Injury is the number one thing that can happen to delay progress and to just torch your motivation. Everything in your training program should be built around you not getting injured, okay? That not getting injured supersedes progress. Not getting injured supersedes going really heavy and doing really cool lifts. Not getting injured is the whole show, because nothing is gonna suck more than getting injured when you're in the weight room. So we're gonna talk a little bit about the joint by joint approach. Eric's gonna give his perspective. I'm gonna give my perspective. It's a concept that was popularized by Mike Boyle, who you saw on the show a little while ago. What was that, 2 or 3 weeks ago?
Yeah.
Now, and Gray Cook, who have arguably done, they've done a lot for the fitness and health industries, and really smart guys. And it's worth taking into consideration as we go through this stuff. So, Eric, do you want to kind of go into, and by the way, guys, before we get into this, please click share, send this out to everybody you know. This is a concept that everybody can benefit from, not just strength coaches. And we're going to really try to keep it for the non-techno, functional anatomy nerds in the world. So, but please click share, like, and we'll see your face go across the screen. But what's like? How would you explain the joint by joint approach?
So yeah, the way that Cook and Boyle describe it is basically looking at the body as a stack of joints, and each joint needs either stability or mobility. And it switches off between each joint. So if we're looking at it from the bottom up, you have the ankle joint, right? And that needs to be mobile. Yeah. The knee joint is above that. That needs to be stable. The hip joint is interesting. It needs both. The hip joint needs stability in the sagittal plane and flexion extension front to back. And it needs, it needs mobility in the sagittal plane, flexion extension front to back. And it needs stability in the frontal plane, adduction, abduction. And then up from that, the spine is split into 3 segments, okay? So the spine is really a series of a bunch of joints, but they're split into your lumbar spine, your low back, which should be mobile. There shouldn't be movement in your lumbar spine. And then the thoracic spine, which is the area of your spine right behind your ribs.
It's the longest one, between
right?
your shoulder blades.
Yep. Yeah. And that needs to be mobile. And then the cervical spine up top should be stable.
And that's your neck. Your cervical spine is your neck.
Yep. And your glenohumeral joint should also be stable.
Glenohumeral is your shoulder.
Sorry.
Your glenohumeral.
Yeah, and then your elbow needs to be stable and your wrist needs to be mobile. So all the major joints, it's this big stack. And if those joints are not meeting their demands, then you're going to have problems. Pain, injury, etc.
And you don't, that's one of the things that, you don't get that right up front either. You get that, you might have this little occurring thing happening over and over and over again for 20 years, and it's just like pennies, and they just keep on stacking up, and keep on stacking up, and keep on stacking up, and then one day, you're done. And it hits you hard. So, a lot of the things that, when you really stop and look at what we're doing in the strength training, what we're doing out here, we're lifting stuff, we're putting pressure on tissue, we're stretching tissue, we're making tissue contract and relax. You know, it's from a conceptual view, it's pretty simple, but when you get into this kind of joint by joint approach stuff, it gets a little bit more complicated. And when Eric was talking there about stability versus mobility, this is one of those things that I try not to let it bug me, but I don't know how much it bugs you. But mobility is just outrageously misunderstood. Everybody thinks that mobility means flexibility. Flexibility and mobility are 2 different things. Mobility means that you have control within a range of motion, not that you just push to these crazy areas. You know, if a person can put their palms on the ground with straight legs. They're not probably getting all of that from their hips where they should be getting it from. They're probably getting quite a bit of that from their low back, for instance, to give a visual. Right. Not to say that's necessarily bad, it depends on the person. But stability is the ability to, your joint's ability to have integrity and to hold the position that it needs to. That's the simplest I think that I can make the explanations. stability is holding position, and mobility is controlling the joint within a range of motion.
Yep.
It's not flexibility. Flexibility is just hitting a certain distance.
Yep.
Yeah.
And it's a continuum, just like we were talking about functional training a couple weeks ago. It's a continuum. General, like you want to be somewhere in the middle, unless you are say an acrobat, a gymnast, a martial artist, right? Yeah. They're gonna be on one side, but and a strength sports are gonna be on the other, but. On either side, you're sacrificing something, which you have to do in those two disciplines. But for generally, we want to be in the middle as far as health goes.
Yeah.
And so going back to that joint by joint approach, if one of these segments, let's say the hip, this is one we can relate to, relating to back pain. Let's say that hip, it needs stability it needs mobility. Front to back, right? So when you're bending down to pick something up, you're going into flexion of the hip. Imagine picking something up off the ground, and you start bending from your hip, and then you're not mobile enough, and so your hip stops moving, and then it's going to borrow stability or mobility. I'm going to confuse this the whole time. It's going to borrow
just say
mobility.
It's going to rob the low back.
Yeah, it's going right. It's going to
literally
borrow it from the low back, and so that low back, which should be stable, is now mobile. Now it's moving to get the rest of the range to pick that thing up off the ground, and it's not meant for that. It should be stable, and so when you get a lot of movement through there, you're going to have problems.
Yeah. And you're not going to have problems on rep 1. You're not going to have problems on rep 10. You're probably not even going to have problems on rep 500. But you are going to have a problem when you start getting into 50,000, 100,000. And this seems like just like when you're deadlifting, but it's not when you're deadlifting. It's when you tie your shoes. It's when you pick up your kids. It's when you reach down and grab something off the floor. It's when you're moving boxes. It's all, it's like these little mundane things that you do throughout the day. Really, there's plenty of people that can lift really heavy. Because they brace their trunk up and they sit back in their hips because they're conscious of it, and then they go out into the rest of their day and they sacrifice their low back over and over and over.
Yeah, and going along with that idea, the more load the more load bearing your spine is when it's going through that, the more of a detrimental effect it'll have. So if you did that on a 500-pound deadlift and your spine went into flexion and moved under that much weight, you might get injured right there. Right. But if it's just daily living, you won't notice that for a long time, and then it ends up being chronic back pain, and you can't figure out why, right?
Right.
So
and you just keep on scratching that itch, and that itch turns into a scat or into a cut, and then the cut turns into a scar, and you just keep on opening it up over and over again. Eventually, you got this really big, nasty thing that you got to deal with. You don't want that. Don't do that. But the joint by joint approach is it can be either, we can look at just one side of the body. So let's just take the right ankle and we're going to go from top up. Or you can take from the head and you can go down. Or you can take from the center and go out, from the hip and go out. So let's say the ankle and then the knee. So the ankle should be, the ankle tends to be, so this is a different perspective on what you were just saying before when you explained it. So the ankle tends to stiffen on most people. So we probably want to look towards mobilizing that ankle just because it gets so stiff. Because if that ankle gets really stiff, then it will rob from the knee, and you'll sacrifice the stability in your knee to be able to get more motion out of your, to get the motion that you need to move, just in general, not out of your ankle. Your ankle's stiff. And the same thing happens with your hip. So when we're looking at knee pain, for instance, we see this a lot with people where this is where people think I'm a miracle worker, or we're miracle workers, because it's it really wasn't all that complicated, but they have knee pain, and we stretch the hip, or we stabilize the hip, or we stretch the ankle, or we stabilize the bottom of the foot, and everything gets better, and like that. And it's what happened there? What happened? It's really not all that complicated. We just use joint by joint.
You just got to know where to look. Whereas a lot of these people have been icing their knee, they've been taking care of the symptoms, but not clearing up the problem, the reason the pain is there.
And I think that's what the joint by joint approach really does give us a roadmap. It gives you a roadmap to where the source of the problem might be. So if you have knee pain, where are the two places that you should first look? Is it the knee, or is it the hip, or is it the ankle, or is it the shoulder? Where should you look?
Right, so it's going to either come from upstream or downstream from that, right?
Yeah.
It's going to come from one of the neighboring joints. So if it's the knee, it's going to be ankle or hip. If it's the low back, it's going to be one of the two joints near it that should be mobile, but they're not. And so that would be the hips or the thoracic spine, the upper back.
Yeah, and your thoracic spine is actually really long. Interesting thing about the thoracic spine versus the lower back, because a lot of people think that you should stretch out your lower back. This is a big misconception. The lower back does not want to move. For one, the lower back, if you look at, I just got done with the body exhibit, and it was a good reminder of this, but a few years ago when people were doing, it got really popular in the fitness industry to do like headstands. Okay. Everybody was doing headstands. It's like, you should not be a 60-year-old that is not gotten off the couch in 6 years and is trying to lose fat, and you should not be doing headstands. The cervical spine up here, the vertebrae are very small. The lumbar spine down here, they're huge, and they're not meant to move. When we test cadaver spines, there's only about 1 to 2 degrees of rotation between each one of those vertebrae. That's not much. That's just a little tiny bit. Whereas up here in your thoracic, it's up to 18 degrees between certain portions of the vertebrae in your thoracic spine up here. So this is made to move. This is made to move around, and this down here, this low back, is not made to move. So do not, if you're having back trouble, this is like a red flag that you should not stretch your low back. It's just don't do it.
Right. Yeah, and that's one of the things. For a while, like, that was facilitated by the fitness industry. Yeah. We were having people do things like sit-ups and these rotational stretches like scorpions.
Well, don't put Grit Gym in that category.
No.
There's never been a sit-up done at Grit Gym. Not once, not ever.
And so that's why we don't do that stuff here, because like when you do a sit-up, you're putting more compression on those discs in the lumbar spine than you would on a max effort deadlift, just from a body weight sit-up. Yeah. Because assuming your spine stays neutral in that deadlift. But so, you're gonna run into to problems if you.
If you just continue to hit that over and over again, you're gonna run into problems. You try to stretch out your low back, and I guarantee you're gonna run into an issue. You try to get that thing to mobilize, and eventually, because you are the most adaptive thing that has ever existed on the face of the earth, your body will adapt, and eventually it will cause pain because it's not meant for that. It's not meant to do that.
And that's an interesting point too with that adaptation. And you can start with it can start a cycle of pain. It's like, say, if you keep borrowing mobility from your lumbar spine when you bend over, right? And now that's more prone to bend. So like now those the ligaments in there are that connective tissue, right? You're right. They can't, and they're getting this adaptation where they are no longer stiff and they're becoming soft, and because that's the stimulus you're feeding.
You don't want to be soft. So you don't want to be soft.
You're going to adapt to that stimulus. So yeah.
And then once you stretch that out, a ligament will stay permanent. This is one of a ligament has less blood flow than a bone. A ligament, once you stretch a ligament, once that ligament's out there, it's done. Like sometimes feel that my AC joint right here, and you'll see like there's just like my clavicle just it's like drops in it. It should be like a nice flush, like real even. Nope, because I had 2 third-degree shoulder separations where I ripped that ligament that holds your acromion and your clavicle together. Technobabble, sorry guys. But I ripped that. I tore that up twice, really bad. And so my shoulder is just a little funky. If you guys watch sometime, when you come to the gym, you'll see that my left shoulder and my right shoulder are not the same. They're like this. And there's nothing I can do about that. It's a physical thing in my body now because that ligament stretched, and it will be that way permanently. And that will happen with your low back too. It'll happen with your knee too. If you constantly try to stretch your knee into like a kind of a hyperextended position, eventually it's going to go there and it's going to stay there, and you don't want that. It's called recurvatum. You don't want recurvatum. Yeah. Anyway, that was a little bit of a what's the word for that? Pontificating.
Right.
Yeah, I learned that word a few months ago. I've been waiting for this moment to be able to use it. But no, like you've got a hip issue, you've got a knee issue, you got an ankle issue. You got to look above and below that joint to figure it out. So a lot of people like, what do you like when you're looking at an ankle issue? What is it when it's an ankle issue? Like my ankle hurts, or the bottom of my foot hurts. Like what's going on? We got to look up the chain, right?
Right.
And if you have a shoulder issue, we're probably going to look from from the lower back up and from the head down. And we're probably going to look from the head down first, because there's usually the solution is you're going to go start with the head and you're going to go down. Or you're going to start with the hip and you're going to go out, or you're going to start at the bottom and you're going to come up. And we were talking before about this too with posture. Like if you walk into a room and then 2 or 3 seconds later your body walks into the room, we've got a problem. But some of that, like if you listen to Charlie Weingroff, you would think that he's a like masterful physical therapist, speaker, presenter, like really super smart guy. He's one of the few people in the world that has squatted quadruple his own body weight. Serious.
Yeah.
He did squat at 800 pounds when he weighed 200 pounds. Anyway, you would say that, he would say that if your neck is out here like this in your posture, then your body believes it's out with your neck. It believes that he calls it centration, that you're not centrated, you're not centered on that joint, and it causes problems down below. But I kind of got away from joint by joint approach there and got kind of excited.
Yeah, no, we're
something geeky. But no, what happens? So you've got a really stiff ankle and your knee hurts. And you get plantar fasciitis. What's going on there? Because we've been talking about how if the knee hurts, what about it's the other way around? What if you got two joints hurting on both sides?
Right. Yeah, I mean, and it's going to be somewhere along the chain. Maybe your knee, maybe your hip isn't stable side to side. It can't control that knee. Say you're squatting. Like if you're one of our clients who's worked with me, you've probably heard some sort of cue to keep your knees out 1,000 times. Whether it's push your knees out, spread the ground apart, take your feet and grip the ground and twist, and something like that. It's all the same thing. It's producing stability in your hip abductors to keep those knees in position. Whereas those knees come in, the arch collapses, everything falls down the chain, and then you're going to have problems in the knee, but also in the ankle.
And then you get used to moving this way, and you have a really bad pattern. And we've talked about this like 50 times now. But the patterning goes out into your real life, and in your real life, you accumulate all these repetitions, and then eventually, you don't get to work out anymore because you got a knee injury. Mm-hmm. No fun. No fun. But what about okay, so like one of the things I've made tons of comments like this throughout my career, and then everybody needs ankle mobility. Everybody needs hip mobility. Everybody needs thoracic mobility. And then, like, every time that I've ever made one of these, about 2 weeks later, someone will come in and they have this hypermobile ankle that goes into like extreme dorsiflexion where they can basically touch their toe to their shin. And it's like, well, you don't need ankle mobility. I was wrong.
Right, yeah, because they're too far off on the end of the spectrum, right? And so the more mobility you have, the harder it is to proprioceptively to know where you are in space and control yourself on a lift, right? Like people who are really mobile have trouble being stable.
Yep.
And so yeah, you need the demand or the function to meet the demands. So you got to train for what you do. And like we said, if you're if you're just a parent, you're working at a desk job, you want to be somewhere in the middle. You don't want.
That's I made this. I made this a few years ago, but it's basically it's two different spectrums made on crosshairs. I don't know if you guys can see it or not, but anyway, so you've got like if you make just an X at the top, you've got weak. At the bottom, you got strong. On the right side, you have flexible. On the left side, you have stiff. So like we're somewhere, or you could do mobile and stable in there too. But on the like weak side and the stiff side, you've probably got your person that doesn't move around a lot, doesn't do it like maybe like a person that sits at a desk all day long and hasn't worked out in a long time. Whereas like your strong, really flexible person, that's like your gymnast or maybe even your wrestler, that have worked on tons and tons of mobility, flexibility, but are also extremely strong. So there's a continuum to all of this stuff, and you kind of want to push yourself to somewhere in the middle. Like you want to be stable, you want to be mobile, you want to have a certain amount of stiffness, and you want to be able to employ that stiffness when you need it. That's one of the most, I think that's probably the most misunderstood thing in the fitness industry right now, is that stiffness is a bad thing. Stiffness is a very, very, very good thing. You need stiffness. Right. But you don't want to be weak, you want to be strong. Mm-hmm. And then, so I probably should make this strong speed, change it around a little bit. But but we were talking about stiffness earlier in the low back, and I don't know if we were super clear on what we meant there. Do you want to kind of go into that stiffness at the low back? Why that's a good thing?
Yeah, why it's a good. So if you imagine your vertebrae, right? They're like, and your discs in between, they're like, you know, they're like rocks sandwiching I don't know, an egg in between or something, and you don't want them to move and too much and crush that egg and pop it, or disc herniation. And so you want that low back to be stable, because it's meant for only a few degrees of rotation, and once you go past that, then you're putting pressure on that disc, which shouldn't be there. And so yeah, the hip being not having enough mobility will cause that low back, will borrow mobility from the back when you're moving, and your discs are going to get compressed more than they should.
Your low back gets stuck between a rock and a hard place, and something's going to give. And your hips have this, like a solid pelvis surrounded by a ton of muscle tissue. One of them is the largest cross-sectional area in the body. For many people, it is the largest muscle in the body. And then you have all of this area up here too. And so it just ends up getting the crap kicked out of it. And if it can't produce the amount of stiffness that it needs to in order to hold that position, no amount of mobility or stability is going to save it. You're going to get stuck.
Right.
Yeah.
So when we're training the core, that's why we should train the core for stability, and not for mobility. So when we do our ab training here at Grit, most of it is, or really core training, it's all encompassing, but it's static through the torso, right. And generally your limbs are moving. So dead bugs, bird dogs, planks with different variations of moving, your hands, fall outs. I mean,
like, even if you, like, a lot of people want to look at the reverse crunch and say that it's not a static movement, and it really isn't, because you are moving up the low back. But at the same time, you would never program a reverse crunch for anybody that lives in like kind of a posterior tilt of their hip.
Sure, yeah.
Like someone who lives in a ton of extension, by the time that, like, by a ton of extension, I mean they kind of walk around like Donald Duck. They stick their butt out, Kim Kardashian style, Pink Panther. So they really stick their butt out when they walk. Like, I mean, basically 90% of the world, almost everybody has a certain amount. Either they're neutral or they're extended. Almost nobody has posterior tilt. So when they're like that, once we get them into the reverse crunch where they're flat and then they kind of curl up a little bit and they move their pelvis in that position, they actually hit neutral and then they go for the reverse crunch. They actually are not going into heavy flexion. And if they were, we wouldn't prescribe that.
Yeah, it's not a crunch like making yourself into a little ball. You're getting your spine stable, bracing against the ground, and then driving those knees up, hinging up off the thoracic, off the part of your spine behind your ribs, which is made for mobility.
Or even a right side curl up. If you guys go and Google that, that's one of the other ones that we're like, well, isn't that a crunch? Isn't that a crunch? Well, a right side curl up is not actually flexing at the low back. It's flexing at the upper back up here. In your upper back, the six pack muscles, they actually attach into your thoracic spine. So to flex your upper back, you actually need your abs to pull you into that position. So we're not actually going into flexion at the low back. We're getting neutral, and then we're asking the body to do something for a little bit, like take 2 breaths, for instance.
Right. And another example that I think a lot of people are familiar with, especially yoga has made it really popular, is like the cat-cow position, right? And like the way we would coach it here, is that all that movement, the flexion extension on the spine, it's all coming from the thoracic. You're trying to keep your cervical spine and your lumbar spine neutral. You're trying to keep them straight. You don't want the movement there. You want it in just that part of your spine behind your ribs.
Extremely misunderstood and like poorly executed coaching. The cat-cow is fantastic. We're not saying that the cat-cow is a bad movement. We're saying that it's very easy to do it in a way that can actually cause you an injury.
Right. Where you're driving your head up and trying to touch your head to your tailbone on the top side, and then you're trying to bring your head into your groin area on the bottom.
It just doesn't work out very well. We used to coach it. We used to use it a lot, and it was just that some people, we just weren't seeing that people could hold position at their low backs long enough. Like, I was going behind people and putting one elbow on their left hip so I could grab their rib cage on the right side, grab their rib cage on the other side, just hold them in position and be like, okay, this is what it should feel like, and then move them up and down. It's like doing that it was like, wow, if I have to go to that length to get someone to click on how a cat-cow should be moved, then we're probably on the wrong exercise.
Right.
So we needed to readjust. So we did. But yeah, it's very common to see like tons of neck movement and lower back movement during a cat-cow, when almost all of it, like if you turn sideways, almost all of it should come from basically like middle of the back to the top of the shoulder blades. Like almost all that movement should happen from up there. Almost none of it should happen from the low back or the the low back or the neck. And that's one of those things. Like this upper back, this big strong guy. No, the upper back area should be like, that's what we're trying to get to mobilize, and the low back is what we're trying to get to stabilize. We throwing enough terms out to you guys yet? Yeah, but remember that mobility is not flexibility. Mobility is the ability to control the joint within a range of motion. Stability is the ability to hold the position. So they're both about the integrity of the joint. You need integrity of the joint.
Right. And flexibility being how far that joint can move in a passive range of motion. So if you're laying on your back and you take a leg and someone takes your leg and cranks it up, that'd be flexibility. Yeah. Where you're not controlling that.
And it's still warranted. Like flexibility is still warranted. Like I check flexibility on people's joints, and then I check range of motion on people's joints, and then I check stability on people's joints. So I want to see all the characteristics, you know. But that's what we're going over on Saturday, right? How to do the assessment. Yeah. What are your thoughts on the assessment? Like, we haven't even talked about that in here, as far as like how joint by joint goes.
Yeah, I mean, I think it goes right along with it. Like from that assessment, you take that and look at it in terms of this joint by joint approach, and you can come up with some solutions to fix their problems real quick.
Yeah, that's the idea. Right. And then you know what is too loose or what is too stiff or what is not strong enough, and then you can make the program based on that. Like, I mean, most of us have 2 arms, 2 limbs, and a core, or 4 limbs and a core, so we're gonna have some similarities. Right. Yeah, like there's only so many movements. You lunge, you split squat, you gate, you twist, you push, you pull, you squat. I think it's already said squat.
Yeah,
and then you hinge. I don't know, I'm going on, but there's only like 7 movements, and so like, how do you get really good at those 7 movements and holding positions in each of the joints while also being able to move through the others? Right. Yeah. But anyway, the ankle tends to be stiff, the hip tends to be stiff, and the thoracic spine, your upper back tends to be stiff, and then the knee tends to need more stability, and the shoulder tends to need more stability, and the bottom of your foot needs more stability for most people. Is that about, that sum it up well enough? Yeah. Cool. Anything you want to, like, we're about up on time. Anything you want to do you got a big shot of wisdom to give out to the world?
Let's see.
I love just like throwing random curveballs at him. I've done like 3 so far.
I'm gonna say, I just saw this quote and I really like it. Health is the foundation of happiness. Oh, yeah. So get healthy, get strong, stay moving.
Yeah, definitely. And like health is like an all-encompassing thing too. It's like exercise, nutrition, mindset, recovery. It's important from all those areas, definitely. All right, guys. Well, thanks for being here. This is I like it when Eric comes on here. He gets more views than I do. This is great. But thanks for being here. Please click the share button, send this out, share it publicly, or send it to a friend. I don't really care, but as long as the message gets out there to more people, so that more people take action on their health and living this life for everything that it can be, and inspiring an experience that they want to have in this life. But anyway, that's why we do the show, and that's why we do everything out here, is to do that. And what's to say? Thanks, Julie. But please share out the message. We really appreciate it. Thanks for being here. And Eric's going to be back next Thursday. We don't know what our topic's going to be yet, but we'll figure it out. All right, thanks, guys. We'll see you soon.